So again, we've entered the French and Indian War. We've got this vast land east of the Mississippi, with the exception of New Orleans. We still have a loyalty to Great Britain. These colonists that are in America think of themselves as loyal citizens of Great Britain. They think of themselves as Brits. They're loyal to the crown. But as time is going to pass here, they're going to develop what we call a distinctive way of life. And this way of life is going to start to have these colonists think a little bit differently than the people in England, because they're really living in a completely different environment, okay? And eventually we're going to become kind of sharply divided on many matters, which is going to lead us towards a move towards independence. So as time goes on, colonists begin to see that the British interests don't always coincide with their interests. And so by the 1760s, many people in America began to think of themselves as colonists first and British citizens second. So they're starting to get a little bit of an independent thinking going on in their mind. Now, are they severing their ties with Great Britain yet? No. But some of these ways of life, these American cultural beginnings, are going to separate some philosophies. So that'll take us to our first subtopic then, which is Southern population, plantation, and social life. Okay? Southern population, plantation, and social life. Remember how many people lived in the British colonies in about the 1760s? We talked about it? Okay, that actually by the late 1760s went up to about 2 million. So there are about 2 million. After the French and Indian War, there's about 2 million people that are living in the British colonies of North America. Now it's kind of interesting because half of that 2 million, 1 million, really lived in 5 southern colonies. So approximately half of the total population in America, in the British colonies, lived in 5 of the 13 colonies, which were the southern colonies. So by the 1760s, more than 2 million people lived in the British colonies of North America, and approximately half of those, about 1 million, lived in the 5 southern colonies. You remember what those were now? What were the 5 southern colonies? Georgia, North and South Carolina, Maryland, Virginia. Okay? So, approximately 1 million people in the colonies were living in those particular colonies. Not yet. It's pretty sketchy at this point. Good question, though. Now, you have 2 different types of people that lived in these southern colonies, right? You had farmers who lived, colonists who were not very wealthy, that lived on small farms. And you had wealthy families who owned what? Plantations. So there was a difference there. So the southern colonists really lived on small farms. They struggled to make ends meet, did the best they could. And they lived on the farmland that wasn't quite as fertile. And so it was the wealthy families that lived on the coastal plains. The coastal plains are these areas not right on the coast, but just off the coast in this area here. And they have very fertile soil on the coastal plains. So it was the wealthy plantation owners that actually lived in the fertile coastal plain area. And their plantations were usually several thousand acres in size. And they lived a lot like wealthy landowners back in England, okay? So these people, I'll just give you kind of a preface, these people are going to be the more reluctant to search for independence when that time comes, because they're the most like the British, okay? They're wealthy. They own plantations on the most fertile coastal plains of America. And they live a lot like the wealthy landowners back in England. So they're going to become the people that stay the most loyal to the crown for the longest. Now, when you were on a plantation, they grew food to eat themselves. They didn't import or go down to this local supermarket, which they didn't have. They grew their own food. But where did the riches of the plantation really come from? The profits. One single, and it could be cotton maybe, but one single cash crop. Okay, and a cash crop is on your ID sheet, and basically what a cash crop is, it's a crop to be grown, to sold as a profit to the landowner. Okay, so it might be cotton, might be tobacco, might be rice, who knows? But a cash crop was the thing that these plantation owners growed the most of, because that was what was going to be used for profit. Now they grew their own vegetables and those types of things to survive, but the cash crop took up most of the plantation. Now let me kind of give you a description of a plantation. They call it a complete economic unit. Okay, and here's kind of what, if you could picture this in your mind. What was in the center of the plantation? Big, huge mansion, usually. Okay, and that's where the wealthy planter family lived. So usually in the center of these thousands of acres on these plantations stood a large house, usually a mansion. And when we get into the Civil War and you see some of these really nice southern houses and mansions that are being shot up and bombed and cannonballed and everything else, these were basically the center of plantations. Okay? Now, around the mansion, you'd find other houses, much simpler houses, or a house, and usually that was the overseer's home or supervisor. So if you go out to the boys' school, for example, hopefully not too many of you are familiar with the boys' school, but they have a big, vast area, lots of acres, and they have a school building there, and they have quarters, depending on your behavior, etc. But the superintendent, Mr. Gilmore, has a home in the middle of the boys' school property where he would be more or less the plantation owner, and then you see a house where the school psychologist is, and you see another modest home where maybe the principal of the boys' school lives, or maybe some workers, I don't know. So it's very similar. So around the mansion were simpler houses, and usually the overseer or supervisor lived there. And then they had many other simple houses that included the skilled workers, and that's where they lived. Okay, skilled workers. You know another name for a skilled worker?
Artisan.
What?
Artisan.
You making that up, Will?
No.
It's not artisans, is it?
No, it's artisans.
No. What is it?
Artisans.
Artisans. Okay, those are actually very good. Those are skilled workers. That's another name for them. Many of these skilled workers were what? They were two things. But mainly what? Well, they were poor, all right.
Farmers.
Slaves and, your favorite term, indentured servants. So a majority, though, of these skilled workers on these plantations were actually slaves. Did they have some indentured servants that were working out their transportation to the New World still? Yes, but a lot of them were slaves. So if you looked at a plantation, you'd see thousands of acres of farmland. You'd see in the middle a huge house or a mansion where the owner lived and his family. Fairly close to that mansion would be another more modest home, but not a horrible home, where the overseer or supervisor lived. And then you'd see all kinds of simpler houses where the skilled workers or artisans worked, or lived, excuse me. Now, each plantation was virtually self-sufficient. What do I mean by that? It supplied its own needs. Every plantation supplied its own needs. So they grew their crops, right, to feed them. And just like wealthy England landowners, they had what that they got their meat from? Usually cattle and hogs. Okay? So a plantation had its own garden, so to speak. Had its own meat, such as cattle and hogs. The raw materials for clothing came from the land. And the plantation owner's wife supervised both indentured servants and slaves in the spinning and weaving of cloth to make what? Clothing for them. Okay? Now, do you think the wealthy people made their own clothing? A little bit, but not too much. This clothing that was being made was for who?
Slaves.
Slaves and indentured servants. Well, this is how this worked. Every year on these plantations, a slave would roll large barrels, whatever contained the cash crop that that particular plantation was growing. What was the most prevalent crop? Tobacco. Tobacco. So, each year on the plantations, these slaves would roll these large barrels, either containing tobacco or cotton or whatever, to the wharves on the eastern seaboard and then load them on vessels that were owned by who? Not England, you'd think so. Who's bringing their ships? Northern colonies. Because did they grow any of this kind of stuff? No. So whatever they were kind of importing from their own colonies. So each year, and there was some that came from England, I'll talk about that. But a lot of these northern colonies sent their merchant ships down to the wharves in the south. And the southern plantation owners would sell their product to northern merchants, which were store owners. Okay? But, as somebody mentioned, they also gave their goods to ships from where? England. And what would the plantation owners do when these ships from England would come and pick up their cash crop and take it back to England? Because they're going to take it back to England, and then they're going to pay them for that cash crop. But what else are these plantation owners requesting? What they gave them a list of what? No? Goods and luxuries. So, I'm a plantation owner. I take all of my cash crop to the wharves. I send it across, and I give a list to my what? I give a list to the plantation owner's agent. And the plantation owner's agent would make sure that the list that the plantation owner supplied would be filled and shipped back to America from England. Now, the definition of an agent is a person acting or doing business for another. Who are your more famous agents you always hear about?
Lawyers.
What?
Lawyers.
Lawyers could be, but sports agents, you hear all about sports agents. They're the ones that negotiate the contracts with the professional athletes. They're agents. And what agents are, again, an agent is a person that acts or does business for another. So these professional athletes, for example, they hire an agent. What do you think the agent gets as payment? A percentage of the player's contract, yeah. Okay, these agents were hired by the plantation owners to represent them in the business transaction of the cash crop and to take these lists back to England and make sure they were filled. So tobacco and rice were really the two biggest things that were grown on these plantations. Cotton also, but at first, tobacco and rice. So the agents would sell the tobacco and rice. They'd bring back the profits along with the requested goods back to the plantation officers. So these agents actually would do what? Go on the boat and go to England. And they would take that crop back, they would get paid for it, they would fill the plantation owner's list and then come back to America and the plantation. And these agents got paid pretty good for doing this for these plantation owners. So each year that happened. They'd grow their crops, their cash crop. Their agent would take that cash crop in barrels to the wharves. They would load it on ships, not only to the northern colonies, but also back to England. These agents would get on the boat, go and get the profits, bring the profits back to the plantation officer, and these requested goods. Now, what type of goods are they requesting? Things they cannot get in America. So some of these goods were considered old world luxuries. What do I mean by old world luxuries? What's the new world? America. What's the old world? Well, not only England, but Europe. Yeah. So the old world is Europe, and the new world is America. So these requested goods would include old world luxuries. And here's some examples of what they would bring back. European fine furniture was a big one. They would request furniture to be brought back. Fine European furniture. Another thing that was usually on the list was table silver, like knives, spoons, and forks that were made out of pure silver. So table silver, so silverware. But now there's a big difference between silverware and what we consider silverware today. I'll bet you your mother, or maybe your grandmother, I mean you guys are younger, but somebody inherits somebody's silver. And so everybody in here has probably got their grandmother's or great-grandmother's silver that they had, which is their spoons, knives, and forks, that are made out of real. You don't have that at your place? Too young maybe. Yeah. But usually that's something that's passed down over many, many generations. I still have my grandmother's silver. I've never taken the stuff out of the damn box. If it was up to me, I'd probably melt it down and sell it for silver. But my wife says, you cannot do that. That was your grandmother's silver.
What are you gonna do with it?
That's
Just
good.
passing it down forever.
You're prepared for marriage. Be prepared for this. But be prepared for this. When you say that, they're going to say, but that's your grandmother's silver. So you just, better for worse, you just kind of turn around and shake your head and go sit and watch TV. Yeah. Hey, that's my philosophy too. My wife never watched these videos, but you know, I try to talk her into leaving and go see. When we didn't live here, I'd talk her into go seeing her mom and dad for about 3 days, and I'd go downstairs and get rid of a bunch of junk. And she never knew it was gone. Can't do that when your in-laws live at the same time. Anyway, back to a different table silver. Okay, fancy clothes. Fancy clothes. Now they made some of their own clothes. But there's nothing like getting the old luxurious English clothing. So, fine clothes. Also, what did they like to drink that they were missing from England? Wine. So fine wines also. And something they were short of in America, and really most of them came from England, were things like books. People actually used to read these things, you know. And so, a lot of books were asked for. So, these rich plantation office owners would request goods including old world luxuries such as fine furniture, table silver, clothes, wine, and books.
So would they've got like scotch too?
Probably. Yeah, liquor. That you couldn't really find there, yeah. Now, you got to remember that these plantations are thousands of acres, so do you have close proximity to your neighbors? No. Matter of fact, these plantations actually were pretty isolated. So visits between plantation families became great social events. That's what you did, is you'd get together with other plantation families for a social event. Because you were a long ways away. You didn't step outside and visit with your neighbor. So since most plantations were isolated and far apart, visits between these plantation families became great social events. They had kind of stated that many plantation owners during a 2-month period of time might be entertaining or be invited out 30 different times in 2 months. So if you think about there's 60 days in 2 months, every other day you're going somewhere or having someone to your place. So these were quite the deal. So it was not uncommon for a plantation owner during a 2-month period of time, during a 60-day period of time, to either entertain people or be invited out as many as 30 times. And what did they do when they got together? They visited. See, you used to visit with people. I mean, they didn't sit across the table and text message each other. There actually used to be a big thing to get together and visit, have a good conversation, and have a good meal. What else might they do while they were visiting? What do you kind of break up? And you guys probably haven't heard of this anymore. What was the big thing they used to do?
Chance.
Well, that's not outrageous. I think sometimes they did that, but not so. Yeah. But not so much that. But what else did they do? What? No, but we talk about that. They did get together and eat, but they visited and later on would sit down and play cards. Cards. Would play cards. Boys, let's get lined up. So these dinners were splendid affairs. Usually a nice dinner followed by a night of conversation or card playing, or maybe both. And this whole custom of social visiting and getting together and visiting and playing cards and enjoying each other's company went down into history and is still called what? Southern hospitality. Okay? So the term Southern hospitality comes from these socials in which these plantation owners and their families would either entertain or be entertained as many as 30 times in a 60-day period. These things became very big social events, and that's where the tradition of Southern hospitality came from. Okay, now, here's another thing that kind of makes you think. Many of these richer plantation owners also owned places where they would go and get away for a period of time. What do you call those now? Vacation homes. They call them townhouses. Okay? So many of these richer plantation owners owned townhouses where they would actually spend several months a year enjoying dancing, music, art, dramatics, lectures. They would get out of town. Your folks ever say, no, let's go to Cash this weekend, let's go to Denver this weekend, let's go somewhere and get out of town. Tired of being in Warland. It happens. They did the same thing. They'd be on these plantations, so these more wealthy plantation owners would actually have townhouses near the cities in which they would take off and maybe spend a couple of months. And they would enjoy the arts of the city, or enjoy the, a play production in the city. They might go dancing, might go listen to music. They may go listen to someone who was lecturing on a myriad of topics. But that was not uncommon either. Now, what did the men do that the women didn't do in these townhouses when they get out to blow off a little steam? Well, that's a good one, but kind of. They raced horses, which you could consider gambling. They raced horses. Matter of fact, we're going to talk about Andrew Jackson, who got into a duel over a horse situation.
He got shot and then had a bullet that's been in his chest forever.
Yeah, it was an interesting story. So, horse racing, which seemed a little risky and only the men did it. What else did men get themselves involved in that women maybe not? Not so much that. I mean, okay, the hunting of foxes. That was the fox hunts were big.
Hunting.
Yep, the fox hunts were very big, and a very big sport of the wealthy, fox hunts. And they also, it's illegal to do with certain animals, like Michael Vick could tell you that. Rooster fights was a big thing. Not dog fighting, but rooster fighting. They would actually take the tough roosters and stick them in there and they'd fight to the death. So while the women were visiting and enjoying maybe the arts and the lectures and those types of things, a lot of times the men would be involved in racing horses, hunting foxes, and rooster fights. That was a big deal. Now, as I mentioned, these wealthy southern plantation owners had a very strong tie to England. And when the American Revolution began, which we'll get into, and the fight for freedom occurred, many of these wealthy southern plantation owners remained loyal to England. And this was not only in